everyone, Lou here. At long last, it's time for a review you all have been requesting since April of this year, and one remake we've all been waiting for a really long time, Ib. For those who don't know, Ib is a game created by Kouri on February 27th, 2012 to extremely well-received success in Japan that would eventually go on to receive an English translation by VG Person, where the game basically exploded into popularity. However, among the RPG horror maker games, Ib has been the odd one out in both its stability and engine. The game was developed in RPG Maker 2000, at the time considered an odd RPG maker to use when VX Ace, Wolf, and 2003 were considered far more stable to use, while RPG Maker 2000 and earlier games are more difficult to properly run without crashing on newer hardware. For as brilliant as the original Ib is, I can't lie that I have literally always had some kind of crash or issue with the game, especially with music and FMVs in the game. Recently, since I started using Windows 10, Mary's theme or the storybook in the game would cause it to crash completely, which let me tell you guys, that sucked. Safe to say, a remake was absolutely necessary, especially as computers are having less and less support for older RPG Maker games, as it runs on software computer programs just don't see a need to run anymore. So Kouri has actually been wanting to make a remake for Ib for a very long time, at least since 2016 from my memory. I can't really pull up screenshots of his tests anymore because it's literally buried under a bombardment of articles and other posts talking about Kouri's new Ib remake, but he's been experimenting with a remake for a while now. One glimmer of hope I remember was him experimenting with sprite makers on RPG Maker VX Ace to try and make Ib and Mary, along with experimenting with sizes for Ib sprites and paintings. However, to everyone's absolute shock and out of fucking nowhere, this spring was an announcement for Ib's remake by Kouri and Playism. Playism is a company, by the way, who distributes classic RPG horror maker games and help get ported to Steam, with the exception of The Witch's House. With this remake's release would come overwhelming positive reviews on every platform, as well as many fans expressing how happy they are to have this remake that finally gives Ib the fresh coat of paint it desperately needed. Now that I've explained the development history a little, let's paint a bigger picture and see if the Ib remake is really bold and brash, or does it belong in the trash? And no, I will not hold back the bad art puns. The story is about Ib, a shy 9-year-old girl who goes to an art gallery with her parents for an artist named Gortena. He was an extremely unique artist in this story who made artwork with multiple mediums, including sculptures, fashion, paintings, and overall just very overly artsy expressionism. While exploring, Ib finds a massive landscape painting of what looks like a fabricated world, only to receive an eerie message asking her to come see something secret, as well as everyone in the gallery going missing. In Spirited Away style, without her parents and alone, Ib ventures into one of the paintings made by Gortena and ends up in a parallel world where all of his paintings and sculptures are alive in some way. With some puzzles, Ib then meets Gary, who helps her on her journey through the art gallery and acts as a big brother figure to her. He's also my favorite character in Ib, so maybe I'm a little biased here. Then Ib and Gary meet Mary, a girl about the same age as Ib who seems friendly although a bit bratty compared to the quiet Ib, and pretty distrusting of adults. At some point, Ib and Gary are separated, so Ib is stuck with Mary while Gary is left to wander around and finds out Mary is actually a painting made by Gortena, specifically his last painting. While Gary found out, Mary is becoming increasingly bratty and agitated that Ib isn't becoming besties with her, to a point where she tries to attack Ib with a palette knife until Gary comes to save the day, where he pushes Mary and she faints, I guess. Ib and Gary then head into the sketchbook of the world, which is where Mary lives. If you mess up, this is where Gary dies and Ib either leaves this world alone or goes with Mary. However, in the true ending, Ib and Gary find Mary's portrait she jumped out of, so Ib and Gary destroy Mary's portrait, where she burns alive and crumbles to pieces. Then you find her diary, where all she really wanted was just to get out of this fabricated world and be a normal little girl, but she can't because in order to leave the fabricated world as a painting, you have to trade places with somebody in the real world. They feel bad, but Ib and Gary then find the portrait of the fabricated world, but this time it's one of the real world gallery where Ib and Gary jump through. If you're not friends enough with Gary, you both escape the gallery without your memories of the place. However, if you're good friends with Gary and gave him Eve's handkerchief, their memories come back and they promise to meet again as they're now besties and like brother and sister. The end! Of course, there are other endings throughout the game. There's a lot of them where Eve escapes completely alone, Gary dies, or Eve ends up trapped in the world. Some of them are a little redundant in that case, but one of my favorite bad endings is actually Welcome to the World of Guartena, because I think it's kind of horrifying that Mary broke Eve and Gary down enough to turn them into shells of their former selves. Overall, interestingly enough, the story for Eve didn't change at all. It's like the Witch's House MV in this case, where it doesn't change anything but instead adds to it. Unlike Mad Father, where it added a completely new section and retcons several actions in the original. Still though, the story for Eve is just great, despite being a very short game that can be completed in less than 2 hours if you know what you're doing. The writing is just so cute and sweet that you're immediately charmed by Gary and even Mary as side characters. Despite Eve being a silent protagonist as well, she's actually adorable. She doesn't say anything, but Kouri manages to use subtle sprite animation to show Eve is a very sweet kid and shy, who is clearly very traumatized over the situation and probably would have lost her mind from fear if it wasn't for Gary protecting her. Overall, I just really love this story. Although I've actually never fully seen the film, a lot of people say the story structure is a lot like Spirited Away from Studio Ghibli, and I can't help but agree with that. Now here's the more interesting part about Eve's gameplay. A lot of the puzzles were basically overhauled and heavily fixed to make a lot more sense. Instead of that really stupid numbers puzzle in the original that at some point I learned to write down in an old notebook, it changed to where you simply just wind up some fake roots to get the apple to give to the mouth. Oh, and some puzzles were fixed to make a lot more sense for an art gallery where now you move a lot of sculptures or something like that. Honestly, I like the new puzzles. The only one I didn't really like was the teacup puzzle because, as you can see from my footage here I'm using, I am awful at sliding puzzles, either because I'm too fucking stupid or I just don't get physics. Though honestly, I wrote down the instructions on the slide puzzle and it's not randomized, so it's not totally terrible and a lot better than the cramped maze in the free version. The only major thing that makes Eve in general kind of frustrating is simply trying to get certain endings. In the original, there was specific instructions to get certain endings, and now those endings are a lot harder because of the new mechanics in the game involving talking to either Gary or Mary. In particular, I found that getting the true end is a lot harder to get than in the original. Like, it legit took me 3 attempts to get the true ending because it was that difficult. Which, by the way, if you guys would like a remake ending guide for Eve, let me know down below because I know not a lot of people are sharing the new requirements for certain endings, and I want to make sure it's easy for you guys because it was a pain in the ass to get the true ending for me. Other than that, the game is pretty easy, honestly. The puzzles aren't challenging to a point where a pretty young kid could probably beat this game with no problem, except they'd end up with one of the endings where Gary dies. It's also especially easy if you know the puzzles already from the free version, specifically if you're like me where I played Eve so much that I can complete this game in about an hour. Actually, due to it being so easy, replay value is honestly pretty low here. The game can only really be played twice because the second playthrough unlocks the true ending and the extra gallery to go through that's filled with more puzzles and lengthens the game just a bit. Story-wise, there's really nothing that adds to the extra dungeon except when you're playing the Eve alone endings where the end of the extra gallery just like kind of explains why Eve sees a specific thing in the gallery a certain way. But that doesn't really make any sense when like there's a book in the room explaining why Eve acts a certain way towards this thing. Overall, the gameplay is pretty easy, but achieving certain endings is really difficult. This makes it a bit more irritating for some, as replays of the game more than 2 times become pretty stale, and while you have multiple save slots to archive certain endings, some endings require an entire playthrough of its own, so that makes it more difficult. It's fine though, just be prepared that you're probably gonna be like me and memorize every single puzzle in your head to a point where you haven't needed a walkthrough in like a decade. Oh, I forgot to mention this in gameplay actually. I don't know if I should have put it in gameplay, but Mary's original theme puppet is not in the remake due to copyright issues with the source publisher of the song, so it's replaced by a new song. It's okay, it honestly fits Mary's toy box room a lot more, but doesn't really fit a lot of scenes where Mary is being innocent. However, apparently Ebe fans found a workaround where you can put the song back in with a little file rearranging, so I guess that's a good thing, you can kind of mod it back in. I don't fully understand it myself, but you can look on Reddit, I think, for a better explanation on how to put Mary's original theme back into the remake for personal use, if you really wanted to. Other than that, I personally think this remake is fantastic. For as fantastic as this is though, I have to admit the game is a little pricey. Although just about every resource in the game was remade, including brand new artwork, I mean, I value the price of a game should equal its playtime and replay value, and unfortunately Ebe is a very short game, which makes the price a bit steep. Just like The Witch's House actually. Okay, well technically speaking the Witch's House MV was worse only because most people are only going to play it once, whereas Ebe's multiple endings can incentivize replaying, but the gameplay is just a little too easy even with the extra dungeon that it makes speeding through the game pretty quick. However, I do still highly recommend playing the Ebe remake, and it's honestly the definitive way to play Ebe with how much it improves and overhauls so much of the game. Maybe pick it up on sale? I don't know if or when Ebe will get a sale and how discounted it will be, but hey, I always recommend sales anyway. Ebe is only available for purchase on Steam, and I don't really know if there's plans to bring it to Mac or Android. I know there is a loop around with Android involving porting the Steam files into an RPG Maker emulation engine called Choco RPG, which by the way, Ebe is like the only game I've gotten to work on that emulator engine back when I would play the free version of Ebe like crazy. Off and Yuminiki? Oh, you're not getting shit because it glitches like crazy with them. With that, I hope you guys enjoy the video. It feels so crazy now to know every single classic RPG horror game we all played in middle school and high school are now finally upgraded and ported to Steam. Okay, well, except Off, but I don't really consider Off to be horror really. I consider it more to be just like fancy French expressionism. It not only better preserves these honestly obscure titles, but I think it'll reach an entirely new generation of fans, and goodness knows the kids these days are totally gonna shit themselves trying to make TikTok and Roblox games or something. I don't know what kids these days actually do, but I'm gonna stick to my guns and say it's stuff on TikTok and Roblox. How do you feel about the Ebe remake though? Did you like it? Did you hate it? As always, let me know down below. Hey guys, thanks for watching! If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're new. If any of you would like to help support my channel in any possible way, my Ko-fi page is down below in the description, along with all of my social media. For any subscribers, new or old, who'd like to help with video ideas, or maybe just want to talk about anime or something, I have a fan server linked down below. See you next time!